All right. So it's my pleasure today to introduce my colleague. Dr. Patricia Orozco is a lecturer of Spanish whose research focuses on Spanish realism. She teaches lower and upper level Spanish language and literature classes, as well as our freshman seminar, International Fairy Tales and Children's Literature. She says that our kitchen is a gastronomy lab where chocolate and Mexican spices are the protagonists.
Okay. Screen.
If I may just jump in quickly. So for our lunch at the end of the course on July 25th, I will put the sign up link into the chat. There are limited spaces we have only 22 seats available at Foodie. So I unfortunately have to close it once we have reached 22. So, but here it is.
Can I go ahead and start?
Yeah, give you the floor.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Here's my presentation. So pantry histories and world systems. The history of the items in our pantries is not merely a record of culinary habit. It is a narrative of global systems and the intricate web of human migration, trade, and power. When we look at our morning beverages, tea, coffee, and chocolate, we're not just seeing ingredients, but remnants of colonial expansion and shifting labor structures. Tea originated in East Asia, transformed from a luxury commodity into a staple of the British Empire, driven by global demand that reshaped trade routes and triggered intense geopolitical rivalry in regions like India and China. Coffee, emerging from the Horn of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, became a catalyst of the development of modern capitalist exchange, with its cultivation deeply entwined with the history of plantation economies and colonial exploitation in the Americas. Chocolate, cherished for centuries by indigenous societies in Mesoamerica, underwent a radical transition in the colonial era. It was reconfigured from a ritualistic drink into a mass-marketed commodity that fundamentally altered breakfast cultures across the Western world. By examining these three items, we begin to see that the domestic sphere is intimately connected to the macroscopic forces of the world system. Each beverage holds a distinct cultural impact, acting as a mirror of the history of global consumption and the enduring legacies of inequality that remain embedded in the contemporary food system. Understanding these histories allows us to recontextualize the routine acts of our daily breakfast, revealing the complex global histories that continue to influence how we eat and drink today. To the modern diner, the morning ritual feels as immutable as the sunrise. We wake, we pour, we consume. Whether it is a cup of coffee, a bowl of cereal, or a buttered tartine, we treat these acts as universal constants. This routine, however, is a curated illusion in the grand arc of human history. The breakfast we recognize is a startling recent invention, barely 3 centuries old. The meal was born only when the world got larger. To understand breakfast is to understand the etymological weight of breaking a fast. In English, we have breakfast, in Spanish, desayuno, and we have other languages here. Perhaps most evocative is the word in Wolof, dekis, which translates to resurrect. For most of history, however, this resurrection was a mere collation, a snack. It was only through a radical shift in global trade and industrial labor, that morning meal transformed from an informal bite into a structured and globalized ritual. Carol O'Neill, in her article, The Role of Breakfast in Health, Definition and Criteria for Breakfast Quality, defines breakfast as the meal that bridges an extended period of fasting, occurring as a mere result of the longest period of daily sleep, with performance and productivity. As such, breakfast serves as the foundation for a pattern of eating for the day. For her, breakfast is an eating occasion. That is, the first meal of the day that breaks the fast after the longest period of sleep and is consumed within 2 or 3 hours of waking. It comprises food or beverage from at least one food group and may be consumed at any location. In her article, she also talks about that not always this breaking of the fast occurs at the same time for everybody, depending on people's jobs, breakfast can occur at other times. While lunch and dinner evolved through local traditions over millennia, breakfast was globalized from its very inception. In the 18th century, a three-continent cocktail began to appear on European tables, bringing together commodities from across the globe. This ritual combined tea from Asia, coffee from Africa, and chocolate from the Americas. Sijuan Pan, in his article, Tea and Tea Drinking, tells us that tea refers to the cured leaves from the perennial plant Camellia sinensis through various processing technologies. Generally, tea is a beverage that is made as a liquid prepared by mixing hot water with dried tea leaves or extracts obtained from tea leaves. Thus, other than plain water, tea is the most popular and the cheapest man-made non-alcoholic beverage, widely consumed all over the world. At present, there are more than 3 billion people who like to drink tea as a beverage in 160 countries and regions. Now, the UNESCO Courier pinpoints the origin of coffee in Ethiopia. There, they explain that ritual codifications of coffee date back to the 15th century, when this product of the mountain forests of southern Ethiopia was discovered and popularized in Yemen. The stimulant was first adopted by members of the mystical path of the Chandelier, initially established in Tunisia and then in Egypt in the 13th century. They began to promote the use of this new product, seeing it as a valuable adjunct to their spiritual exercises. However, there was considerable controversy in the first decades of the spread of coffee consumption in Arabia and later in Egypt, Turkey, and throughout the Ottoman Empire. Some legal experts consider that the excitement provided by coffee was similar in name of the intoxication produced by wine, which was prohibited in Islam. Chocolate is a beverage derived from the cacao bean, a plant that originated about 5,000 years ago in the Amazon rainforest of what today is Ecuador. In cacao use in Yucatan among the pre-Hispanic Maya, Gabriel Vail says, cacao consumption was not important in and of itself, but rather as part of elite feasting rituals that cemented social and political alliances. In addition to being one of the chief components of the feast, cacao was one of the items gifted to those participating in the ritual, as were the delicate vases with their finely painted scenes of court life from which the beverage was consumed. I must say that this article contains some amazing images that talk more in depth about those rituals and the cacao associations with other objects. While colonial reshuffling often blurred these origins, transplanting coffee to American plantations and cocoa to African soil, the 18th century reality was a great novelty. For the first time, a single meal required the coordination of 3 different continents. By 1739, paintings like François Boucher, Le Déjeuner, captured aristocratic families gathered at 8 a.m., as you can see on the clock, sipping these exotic infusions. What was once a simple half-served snack had become a choreographed performance of Enlightenment era globalization. The rise of breakfast necessitated an entirely new material culture, sparkled by a clash of postural politics. Initially, Europeans imported porcelain tea bowls from China, following the Eastern tradition of bringing the head down to the vessel. 17th century Chinese porcelain tea bowls represent a pivotal era when delicate, heat-resistant, and handless teaware transformed global drinking habits. However, European social etiquette demanded a different dignity. One remained upright, bringing the drink to the lips. This cultural friction sparked a wave of industrial espionage. In 1708, the Meissen porcelain factory in Germany scrambled to replicate Chinese techniques, but with a specifically Western modification: the handle and the saucer. By the 1740s, the handle hack allowed Europeans to hoist hot beverages while maintaining a proper vertical posture, fundamentally changing how humans interacted with their food. This era also gave rise to specialized vessels: the wide-mouthed teapot to release aromas, the tall coffee pot to retain heat, and the unique chocolatier. The chocolate pot featured a distinct hole in its lid for the moussoir, a wooden whisk used to froth the beverage into a decadent foam, marking the transition from a simple drink to a culinary event. On the left-hand side of the screen, we have a molinillo, a foam maker device developed in New Spain around the 17th century as an evolution of the pre-Hispanic chicoli. On the right, we have still life with copper pot, jug and bread, painted by the French artist Jean-Baptiste Siméon, dated between 1730 and 1735. Here you can see a copper pot whose lid has a hole where the molinillo is inserted through to froth the chocolate. These exotic drinks were not immediately palatable. In their natural states, coffee, tea, and cocoa were too bitter for the 18th century European palate. To make them morning ready, they require massive adjustments in the form of milk and, crucially, sugar. This demand for sweetness linked the breakfast table directly to the most brutal systems of the era. The explosion of breakfast consumption was fueled by the islands of sugar in the Antilles, where plantations multiplied to meet the growing appetite of the West. Sugar cane plants were in the holds of Columbus's caravels as early as his second voyage. The Antilles proved immediately favorable for plantations, and the slave trade followed shortly thereafter. The history of your morning cup is inextricably tied to this dark synergy, the sugar that made the three-continent cocktail drinkable was the primary engine of the global slave trade. Meanwhile, Europeans blamed one another about who is to blame for the slave trade, where usually the English are the designated culprit. Martin van den Bel's research has pointed out to the French governors and Dutch merchants in his 2022 article. There he says, between the 1630s and the 1660s, the Caribbean was transformed by a sugar revolution. In these nations, planters and merchants brought slaves from Africa to work to the fields. He further explains that scholars have traced the sugar revolution to the island of Barbados, where during the early 1640s, planters reacted to the plunge in tobacco prices. These plantations involved a highly complex process that began with sugar cane planting and ended with partially refined sugar. They planted and harvested the cane, extracted its juices, and boiled those juices into products of various levels of refinement, from molasses to sugar. A plantation would normally consist of one or two extraction mills, a boiling house, a curing house, a distillery, and a warehouse. The image that you see comes from the magazine The Economist, where they talk about how in the 20th century some of the changes that were made impacted how the trade was by those years. The Industrial Revolution provided the final push to codify breakfast. Originally, déjeuner, breaking the fast, was a noon meal. As the workday shifted and lunch moved later, the meal taken upon waking became the petit déjeuner, or desayuno in Spanish. The catalyst was the mechanical alarm clock, patented in 1847 by French clockmaker Antoine Redier. Although we already had different alarm clocks made before, but apparently this one was patented. As factories demanded fixed rhythms, the alarm clock became the symbol of a world that no longer worked with the sun, but with the machine. This shift was profound because it marked the death of the double sleep, the ancient habit of waking for a period of activity at midnight before returning to bed. Without that midnight waking period to eat or socialize, the body required a massive nutritional jumpstart to bridge the gap between rest and grueling labor. Breakfast then became a utilitarian tool. Chemists like Ferdinand Brunsch, who identified caffeine in 1819, provided the scientific justification for excitants. Coffee and tea were no longer just luxuries. They were essential fuel to maintain factory cadences. The role of chocolate in this new morning order underwent a surprising transformation. In the 18th century, chocolate was considered a potent stimulant for adults. Giacomo Casanova famously claimed it was superior to champagne. However, as science identified caffeine as the primary adult excitant in coffee and tea, and noted its relative absence in cocoa, chocolate was then reclassified. By the late 19th century, it moved from the ladies' eating place to the children's room. Deprived of the adult kick of caffeine, chocolate became the safe, non-excitant breakfast staple for children, a status it has maintained for over a century. And here I'm going to talk just a little bit about Mexico. After the Mexican Revolution in 1920, a corporate state organized society into official sectors. It managed labor unions, peasant leagues, and professional associations directly under the PRI, the ruling party's umbrella. While the Constitution maintained three branches, unchecked power concentrated in the executive office, the president in turn acted as the supreme arbiter of political and economical life. The post-revolutionary state took ownership of all natural resources, leading to the 1938 oil expropriation and asserted control over the Catholic Church and its institutions, including schools. Between 1920 and 2000, 18 institutional Revolutionary Party chosen presidents took their turn to oversee Mexico's modernization. They experimented with a school system that inherited ideas from the 19th century via the Ley Moyano of the 1857 without including Christian doctrine. One key goal of education reform around the world among socialist nations was the creation of institutes of nutrition. In Mexico, this began in 1922, first in the central states, then with President Lázaro Cárdenas' policies on nourishment, which was viewed as a social contract. With it came the formalization of the Institute of Nutrition in 1944. At its inception, one of the key objectives was to provide breakfast at the primary schools for the underprivileged. Although in those days, children only attended school for 4 hours, there was a great need. Now, you may not know, but generally, primary schools or secondary schools do not have cafeterias. They only have a cooperative where you can purchase some items. By the 1970s, the northern states were enjoying some modernization that brought in the newly minted education reform that changed the curriculum as well as their approach to breakfast. In states like Nuevo León or Jalisco, students received a chocolate beverage infused with vitamins. The distribution to the schools was rationed, so parents were advised to monitor themselves and allow the first and second graders to be the first. So even though the distribution was provided in the early mornings, it wasn't enough for all the children. By the end of the 19th century, the repetitive nature of breakfast made it the pioneer front of the modern food industry, while lunch and dinner remained somewhat creative and varied, eventually incorporating global influences like sushi or tacos. Breakfast became a field of industrial stagnation. The meal was standardized by three key players. Dr. Kellogg, who commercialized cornflakes in the 1960s, although with a somewhat dark past within the eugenics movement in the United States. And then we have Van Houten, who developed soluble cocoa in 1828. And of course, Thomas Lipton, who revolutionized the tea bag. This led to a banal and predictable meal, while the rest of our culinary world evolved. The classic breakfast of cereal, toast, and a hot beverage became an industrial artifact, frozen in times for decades to serve the efficiency of the factory clock. So today, we are witnessing the first crack in this 300-year-old regime. The standardized breakfast is being deconstructed. Modern consumers are moving towards individualized, ethical choices. Granola made of quinoa or buckwheat, and plant-based milks that replace the dairy of the industrial era. The traditional breakfast was the child of a specific epoch, one defined by the death of double sleep and the rise of the mechanical clock as its digital age. As our digital age once again redefines the boundaries of labor and rest, we must ask if our modern breakfast was born from the rise of the factory clock. What will the morning meal look like in a world that is once again redefining how we work and sleep? Whatever your beverage of choice may be, tea, coffee, or chocolate, this is the mug that you need. That's all that I have.
Thank you, Patricia.
Hmm?
Anyone has any questions, remember to put them in the Q&A. Do you have any right now? So I guess we can start with, do you have any sense of an answer to that last question you asked? Kind of what will tomorrow's breakfast look like? If it seems like we already,
Yeah, we already see it evolving in the with places that offer. I can think of the Mexican breakfast. I think the shift already began at the end of the 90s with the opening of these places and offering breakfast burritos,
Mhm.
items like that.
And then that question, so there's both the portability question, right? Burritos and quick foods, moving from cereals to things that are more portable. And then the one of the things that changed most, it sounds like, is the time frame, right? So when is breakfast served? And, I think fast food places cut off their breakfast at a certain hour in the morning, right? And then switch to the lunch menu. I wonder if that's, maybe that will be more flexible and there's arguably, a change in work schedules, more people on night shifts, things like that, more people working from home. So maybe the time isn't as important as it used to be.
Yeah, exactly. And you can also see it when you're traveling because um, some of the hotels they offer this extravagant breakfast that they almost look like a meal, and um, I don't know, it just gives you the sensation that everybody eats all these fancy meals, but that's a different reality, I suppose.
Yeah. Are you able to see that? I don't know if you can see the Q&A questions. So Mark had two questions. The first being, how would you reimagine breakfast?
Let me see the. See.
It's along the
I
bottom
don't
by
think I can see that. the questions, but
Okay.
so how do I reimagine breakfast? For me, breakfast, it is, as the saying goes in English, the most important meal. I am a sit down person for breakfast. I cannot see it in a different way. Well, I can not every day eat the Mediterranean style breakfast. I do what people in Mexico or in the Caribbean do, which is a cereal, a type of cooked cereal. In Mexico, sometimes it's made out of corn
Hmm.
or like the oatmeal that people are familiar here. And uh, maybe the one thing that some people should think about including is more fibers in their diet,
Hmm.
even for breakfast.
And he also asked, could breakfast become an extension of dinner from the day before, a way of using leftover food?
I know that in places like Colombia and even in Mexico, it is very popular that around the holidays, uh, you eat those leftover foods in the morning, even though
Mhm.
they may be so greasy and uh, um, and heavy for your stomach. That happens. I see that a lot um, when I go home to Mexico, or when I see it on some soap operas from Latin America. It is very common that people
Yeah.
do that. I don't
And
know if it's like an everyday thing, but for the holidays, for certain.
when there's a lot of leftovers, perhaps that,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. I
And
don't know if people do that with the turkey dinners, though. Do they eat that for breakfast or not really?
I don't think, I mean, people will sometimes sort of make sandwiches of the
Yeah, but that
various
could be
Thanksgiving
like a noon
ingredients, but
meal, right?
I don't think I've known anyone to do it for breakfast, but who knows?
No, back home it is the meal, the dinner that you had for the celebration. It can be an extension. I don't know
Yeah,
if this
and
person is Mexican or maybe from other traditions. Maybe they also do that.
yeah. And Debbie had pointed out in the chat too that American diners offer all day breakfast, right? So it's almost an inverse
Right.
of how the pattern started. And one of the students was asking, what was the name of the chemist who brought caffeine to the regular person?
Hold on one second. The one that discovered uh, that there was caffeine.
I think so, yeah.
Let's see. We're gonna get there fast enough. I'm gonna have to probably get back to
Yeah.
that question. I'm gonna be able to find it right away.
Yeah. And another, an anonymous person asked or says the idea of an American breakfast was largely influenced by the health directive paired with cereal, which largely popularized eating bananas with cereal. Did something similar happen elsewhere in the world?
Not from what I would see, because the at least in the Enlightenment time, what was included was either of these three beverages or pastries and and jams. But and now and in the for example I can also talk about the Mexican meal. It
Hmm.
did not include bananas, which is strange because we have so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Josh asks, what benefits could arise or current social habits evolve with more double sleeping? Also, is that associated with biphasic sleeping?
That I don't know. I think the majority of us are so used to nowadays sleeping uh, or we're supposed to, that's what we're told, 8 hours. I don't know if we could go back to the double sleep uh, because it could be very hard. When I lived in Mexico, um, when it was time of the fiestas, people don't really sleep, you know.
Mhm.
Uh, but in order to stay awake, you have to keep on eating. That was one of the tricks. So I don't know how good that was for you. Something that I'm sure there must be some studies on whether there are benefits or not of the double sleep.
Yeah.
But if I remember correctly, it was very tiresome.
And Elodie followed up on your saying that breakfast is the most important meal of the day and wonders if where that notion came from and whether it was part of a marketing campaign or something that developed more organically.
Um, I didn't verify if it was if the idea came from somewhere else, but I found it in some of the articles that I was reading about the American breakfast. Uh,
Hmm.
but they did not mention the source of that idea.
Yeah. Let's see. So Karen says we're equating breakfast with getting up, eating, and going to work. If you work watches or shifts, I guarantee getting off at 7 becomes dinner time, so leftovers from the night before taste great. I was actually thinking about that because my sister had a classmate whose mother was a nurse on the night shift, and the entire family had traditional dinner, like, meat and potatoes for breakfast and like cereal before they went to bed. So their whole schedule was inverted.
And yes, and that is what the lady that I mentioned at the beginning, the Carol O'Neill, that's what she said. She said that um, uh, that laborers they don't follow the same schedules as the regular person would because they would have to follow their own schedules. And she goes into details of several groups of people and how they adjust their meal times.
Um, and Mickey was running specifically about eggs, saying that in the US, eggs have largely been associated with breakfast, and she wondered if there was any comments on sort of social, political, or economic implications of that.
Um, Not in the items that I studied, because I was focusing on the beverages. But anecdotally, I can tell you that in Mexico, eggs are a huge part of the meal, and in some of the places that I have been in Europe, in the Netherlands and France and in Spain and uh, the UK, they all offer eggs in their breakfast.
Mhm. Someone asks, did the meals for the slaves on sugar plantations also include this breakfast invention? I'm not sure. It's not clear to me what the this refers to, whether it's the timing or the switch over to the faster cereal based. I'm not sure.
Um,
I guess maybe if we can back out a little bit and just are you familiar with what meals for slaves look like on sugar plantations?
no, but I wonder if the Dutch writer that I mentioned, that he may also have more information on that. I don't remember seeing that just on the article itself where he talks about how uh, the the sugar exchanges began. in talking that it was not only the British to blame, but also other Europeans. And he may mention also um, more information. His name was Martin van den Bels. Um, so he might talk about that.
And Hannah says, having heavy dinners before sleep is so interesting because you would think that it's counterproductive. Why not have a heavy breakfast to get energy for the day? Where did the idea of heavy dinners come from?
Mm, dinner, I don't really know where the idea of having dinner comes from. And I'm assuming that this person is talking about the dinner as it is understood in the US, like after
Thinking.
five, between
And that,
5 and 7. Um, uh, and in the rest of the world, as you know, dinner normally is at 2.
mhm.
So you don't really have a heavy meal at night, because this person is correct. A large meal gives you a lot of energy, and the later that you eat that dinner, uh, the more counterproductive it's going to be.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm sure that that again the shifting of those times for America, it's a product of the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
You know,
And our colleague Scott has a question regarding the history of chocolate. At what point did chocolate become considered a dessert? There seems to be some overlap between what many cultures consider dessert and what they consider breakfast foods.
I think it was as I mentioned at when this person whose name I have not been able to find here in my when they discovered that that chocolate did not have enough caffeine, or maybe nothing at all. So then it becomes more like a beverage for the children. And that's with that shift, then the marketing was towards that, or towards making it more, as in Spain and Mexico, as a merienda beverage, with the chocolate, con churros, you know. Um, and uh, so that and for example, I saw when I was researching that part that, for example, in the US they have that beverage yoo-hoo, or I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah, that's right.
And and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's usually marketed for children,
Hmm.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think sort of not about chocolate specifically, but following up on Scott's question, this is something students notice almost immediately when they stay in homestays is that uh, yogurt is considered a dessert in France. It is definitely not a breakfast food because it's considered far too sweet to be a breakfast food. So it's served after dinner, perhaps, as in lieu of dessert, and that's something that always surprises them.
Mhm. Well, in Mexico, it's eaten both as dessert and
And
as a regular part of the meal. Um, and it can be eaten in the mornings and at night as well. It is common, and it's similar to what we have here for us, that we call Greek yogurt.
Mm,
Back home, it's called hokoke. And hokoke is normally served in earthenware small bowls. I don't know why, but that's how they do it back home.
interesting. Others, let's see. Open. Mark was saying that it'd be hard to do double sleeping would be hard in the modern world. Let's see.
And I found the name of the chemist that found that identified the caffeine. It's Ferdinand Runge. I don't know how to pronounce that. It's Runge.
Mhm. Any other questions? Oh, yeah, Mark was saying too that in answer to the question about the heavy meals at night that it takes longer to prepare them. So perhaps you need the time after work to prepare those larger meals. And Marcel, do you want to? You were saying that there's not time in the middle of the day to eat a bigger meal or go to a. Oh, we can't hear you again. I don't know why it always does that. I don't know if that's. Is there a break during in France, there's a large break for lunch. So 2 hours in schools usually and workplaces as well sometimes. Is that true in Mexico too? That there's a
It is because dinner, not in the northern states, but in Mexico City, dinner happens between 2 in the afternoon and 4.
Mm,
So everything closes. There's no one to be found around
yeah.
those times. Um, uh, and I found out that it's similar in Spain, you know. And probably not for everybody anymore, but because it's more and more common to just have a light lunch.
Hmm.
But um, I don't know. I guess nowadays depends on the job that you have, you know, and if
Whether
they can afford to give you a 2 hour break.
yeah.
But because then you know how it is that the stores are open until like I don't know 9 or 10 at night.
Yeah.
You have to also account for the heat because those are the times where the heat is at its peak. So you better be indoors.
Yeah. Not out in the cafes, which are
Yes.
yeah. And Phyllis says, as someone born in the 1940s, I saw leftovers used for breakfast, especially on the farms. Also, in the 50s and 60s, many people came home for the midday meal, so it was normal for the heavy meal to be served then. So that same idea of a break in the middle of the day.
Yeah, when I lived in North Dakota, over there, we had the strict times of eating dinner at 5, which at the time it was way too early for me.
Early.
But you know, you get used to that, and you understand. They followed the farmers' times, and they had to be up, you know, 4 a.m. and all those. So then that's why it was understandable to eat dinner at those times.
Yeah. Any other questions? Everyone? Okay. I think we have answered everyone's questions. So thank you, Patricia.
You're welcome.
And we will see everyone then next Tuesday. And for the students, we will go ahead and meet a little bit early over in our regular on our other Zoom link. All right.
Okay. So bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.